On May 25th, 2020, Minneapolis, Minnesota, United States. Police officers were responding to a call that a man was trying to use a counterfeit $20 bill, and the description matched that of 46-year-old African-American man George Floyd. He was arrested and held down by the police officers, one of whom had his knee on George Floyd's neck.
Floyd pleaded that he couldn't breathe.
He cried out for his dead mother.
He pleaded that he didn't want to die.
When Floyd fell unconscious, the officers didn't move. They released their grip only when an ambulance arrived. He was pronounced dead later at a local hospital.
Images of him being slowly suffocated were quickly seen around the world. His death sparked renewed protests in support of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Thousands of people took to the streets in Minneapolis, while tens of thousands of protesters across the U.S. marched peacefully. In cities across the U.S. and around the world, cries of protest emerged in response to George Floyd's death.
This May marks a painful anniversary for Black Americans and allies of Black Lives Matter around the world. For many, vivid memories still linger of the shocking video depicting George Floyd's last moments. In a matter of 9 minutes and 29 seconds, he was gone. And the world mourned, then protested, another traumatic death of a Black man at the hands of a police officer.
In enough places around the country, there were enough circumstances that seemed suspect that a critical mass began to see something that is fundamentally wrong with the system, and so little by little we saw reforms.
In other countries, statues deemed to symbolize racial injustice were taken down, and protesters demanded that anti-racism measures be stepped up.
In Belgium, protesters defaced symbols of Belgian King Leopold II, who colonized the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the UK, protesters tore down statues of Edward Colston, a slave trader in the 17th century. In Germany, some of the largest protests outside of the US took place, demanding a reckoning with its own colonial past and its stance on racism in the country.
Over the last year, we've seen many organizations respond to the call for racial equity and justice in a variety of ways, from the formations of cross-fundamental committees to drive systemic internal changes and commitments to increase representations of Black employees, to internal listening sessions, monetary donations, and more.
The Associated Press reported that between May and October 2020, the top 1,000 U.S. companies committed $66 billion to racial equity causes, and 18% of the same companies made internal commitments to these issues.
Former police officer Derek Chauvin, who knelt on George Floyd, was convicted on charges of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and manslaughter after a 3-week trial.
A civil rights and police reform bill known as the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act was introduced. The legislation aims to combat police misconduct, excessive force, and racial bias in policing.
After BLM shook the world in 2020, we are the ones to make sure this is going to be another big year for BLM across the country.
What we need to see happening this year is BLM activity happening internationally, sustaining programs, campaigns, initiatives, and reforms.
We're moving from a place of just understanding to planning a vision for where we need to be and doing what we need to get there.